It might have been one of the strangest things to happen to Lynn, Peabody, and Salem, and nothing quite like it has happened since. It was a fleeting incident that was talked about in a "did you see that" kind of way, and not really talked about further. It was a singular occurrence that rippled through this Essex County civilization like a benign earthquake. Most people were too distracted to see it going by and only caught the tail end of it as it scattered down the street, for the human race is never ready for these sudden moments so sublime that they often border on horror. In April 2022, Lila Concord happened upon a book of Corbin Chatterton's poems in a moment of pure serendipity. Lila herself was 31 and played the organ in St. Mary's Church in Lynn, Massachusetts. She found the volume of Chatterton's poems in the South Branch of Peabody Library on a particularly warm day, sitting dusty and neglected behind a row of 19th century novels that included Wuthering Heights, Emma, and Far from the Madding the Crowd. Here, this bygone poet hid behind the statues of the English greats, an American child playing in their shadow. She reached for this volume the way you'd reach to scoop up an injured mourning dove, something which had cooed outside her window that morning. Oh, I forgot we had that. The elderly librarian cooed with her voice creaking with apology. Her eyes flew through her spectacles and onto the volume with both remembrance and inquiry. Corbin Chatterton. He was born in Salem, you know. Buried somewhere in Pine Grove Cemetery in Lynn. It was kind of hidden behind the English classics back there, Lila explained. The library took on the brevity of a bazaar. The librarian walked into her own memory to shell out a bargain. Yes, he was an early romantic. He couldn't quite seem to launch himself into literary stardom like some of the others, though. Lila felt the injured mourning dove twitch its wings within her chest. Oh, what happened? I think it was in 1825 that he got very sick and died. It might have been consumption. His poetry lived on through small presses. I believe this volume is an original from 1823. Can I check it out? Honey, I don't think anybody's ever checked out this book. I myself even forgot it was there. I'll let you have it for as long as you want. Thank you. You said he was buried in Pine Grove Cemetery? I believe so. Well, you see, originally he was buried in Potter's Field somewhere out in Danvers, but when Pine Grove was established in 1849, his surviving brother motioned for him to be moved there. His brother worked and worked to afford a proper tombstone for him then. I don't remember where in Pine Grove he is exactly laid, but he's somewhere in there. Alone, Lila breathed. Naturally, the librarian said, and took the book, opened it and stamped the receipt stuck inside the first page. It had no prior steps. What did this young man write about? I haven't flipped through that volume in a while. At first, he was obsessed with the sea. Then I think he began going batty and started writing about love. One has to be batty to write about love, Lila snickered to herself. Batty as Corbin Chatterton. Ma'am, how old was he? I think early to mid-20s. He was an apprentice of some sorts before poetry whisked him away. He had no higher education. He was just one of those late symptoms of Shakespeare. Lila, having no response, turned the volume over in her hand, a movement that made her beaded bracelet jingle, and went, I'll have a look at it today. Thank you. You have a wonderful day, young lady, and enjoy this beautiful weather. She gave a charitable smile while stepping backwards towards the door. Oh, I know, you too. Bye. And she carried Corbin Chatterton back out into the world again, into spring weather that the poets of Romanticism would have gone hysterical for. She took the volume over to Pine Grove Cemetery, the grounds of which were enclosed by a tall cobblestone wall, caked in moss. It was quieter than a library. All the tombstones, Madonna statues, and crosses ranged from the kind of stone Medusa's eyes introduced to the polished copper pennies would never be again. She carried the volume over to a dip in the land where there was a turtle pond frequented by ducks. She sat down on the lime green lawn where its rainwater smell welcomed her, and all the turtles sunned themselves on the rocks in the pond. The turtles were such content aliens with black heads that had yellow stripes and eyes concentrated in an outer space serenity. The content was contagious, and it put Lila in the proper mood to read poetry that was 199 years old. She read some verses aloud to herself as if to make sense of them. They made eternity for only two. We mustn't crowd the wedding thunderclouds. They made eternity for me and you. She flipped to the next page. She was careful with her voice, knowing literature and poetry needed a diligent vessel, and that even reading poetry alone was still a responsibility, so her voice was meticulous as she read a new poem to the turtles. Today I set a cooing pigeon free. Into the radiant tomorrow flew a dove to find my lover yet to be. I watched it near the sunset's golden hoop and joined its luster as the portal closed to find a woman that I've yet to know. Lila read, and she imagined a young man in a white blouse with loose cuffs donating a mourning dove to the sky in a celebratory manner. In her mind's eye, she saw the dove shrinking and shrinking as it flew away until it vanished, and she thought about the mourning dove that had been cooing outside of her window that morning. It ached her because she could only imagine the majority of this pigeon fear battling the identity crisis of being a silhouette. Faint stripes of sunset light to break up the shadows on his figure. She could picture him releasing the bird, and she could picture him being 80% silhouette, even though the poem stated absolutely nothing about it. That was a short one, she said to the turtles. Then she started another poem. I hear the organ, but it's far away. I hear her rosary is jingling. Oh, what a gallows is a maiden's wrist, a future knuckle that I haven't kissed. The organ music jumps between our times. I hear the thunder clouds distort its hymns, which would have played the day our wedding day, a sound no church in Salem claimed to make. I asked the organist to play again and imitated what I heard to him. Oh, but the hymn I heard must not exist, for what he played I didn't recognize. But still, sometimes the humming leaves my lips, and though alone in love, I am today. The poem finished and something came over. It does exist, she shouted at the open volume. That line, oh, but the hymn I heard must not exist, caused this aggravation in her. She had shouted this with the air of being in the thralls of a romantic quarrel, a couple arguing in the kitchen, but she was just in front of the turtle pond in Pine Grove Cemetery. She had sounded so desperate to get some phantom husband to realize something, but all she did was make the sunning turtles retract their heads into their shells. The beads of her bracelet jingled when she turned the page. Beyond the universe's growing pains, the nebulas who take so long to stretch, I think my love is in the future days, and woe that just my ghost will know her breath. She mumbled, the poetry having administered some sedative to her narration voice. Corbin, she whined sympathetically under her breath. She brushed her fingers over the tan page as if to disrupt the seeds out of the poetry. But all the words had already been planted and sprouted. She looked up from her volume and at the turtles. They were just now starting to poke their heads back out with the languid speed of sunrises. She felt as slow as them. She returned her attention to the poetry and read quietly, no longer reading aloud so as to keep her from shouting again. She ended up remaining quiet for so long that the turtles might have started believing that she was one of the Madonna statues of Pine Grove if a Madonna statue got up, sat down, and took off her shawl. The volume was 121 pages. Some pages had 2 poems on them, some had just one on it, and some poems rambled on for 2 or 3 pages. They weren't all about the strange long-distance relationship the poet had, but some were mundane and about nature, typical poet things. Some were about mortality, were celebrations of Jesus' sacrifice, but most of those 121 pages harbored poems of this strange long-distance romance. And when Lila had time to feel what she read, the analytical part of her mind started awake, which only deepened her curiosity. "Oh, honey, I said you could keep that book for longer." The librarian cheered when Lila entered the South Branch Peabody Library the next day. The librarian's face was red and puffy with joy, while Lila, everything about Lila was alive. The beads on her wrist jangled as she stomped, not walked, and her black tresses bounced. She had gotten a little pink from sitting in the sun yesterday, and now there were 121 pages of poetry in her eyes. She looked angry to not have known about the volume sooner. "Have you ever shouted at a book?" Lila asked, to which the librarian shrugged. "Not in here, not since I was a girl, but yes, plenty of times. When the narrator was wrong about something. Honey, I find sometimes the narrator is often right. We just don't know how to accept it yet. That's how you know it's a great story. Why? Did Corbin Chatterton ruffle your feathers?" Lila didn't answer. Instead, she looked down at the volume and thought of the line that made her shout. Oh, but the hymn I heard must not exist. She didn't shout now, but felt her unbridled rebuttal echo within her. "I guess he moved me," she admitted. The librarian's smile was enough to make the April sky outside even bluer. "I just needed someone to talk to with about this collection," Lila said in another admission. "Well, I'm certainly not busy now," the librarian said. "Looks like it's just us in here, honey. Why don't we dissect some of it together?" "I would like that," Lila said, and though separated by age, the two shared similar smiles. The librarian waddled out from behind her desk, and the two sat at a table with rustic rainbows of book spines shelved behind them. They went through the poems that affected Lila the most, but the whole time someone was knocking on the door of a cottage in her mind. She did her best to ignore it because she wanted to be polite and nod while the librarian read a poem, gave her 2 cents on it, and then read and analyzed another. I think this one summarizes Corbin's feeling of how the realization of existence is constant. See here, a string in time my fingers interrupt. I feel, not hear, the summer air I pluck. Geez, that's beautiful, isn't it? It is, Lila agreed, but where did that pride in her voice come from? Play on, the great nothing I wrote myself. Today's tranquility will be enough, the librarian read. The pointer finger plucks, the middle plucks, and then sometimes it twitches in my thumb. Ah, see, I love that. The librarian held up her hand and wiggled her fingers, trying a pleasant chuckle from Lila. Is this the only work of his you have? I can call the main branch and see if they have any of his other collections, but yes, as far as I know, you are in possession of the only Corbin Chatterton work we have in the South Branch. Very interesting, Lila said, her eyes consulting the closed volume on the table. Do you have any idea of where he's buried? No, honey, I'm sorry to say I don't. As I've said before, he's in Pine Grove, but I'm not sure which section or lot he's in. I think I'm going to go looking for him. The librarian sounded sorry that she had to laugh. Honey, there's almost 100,000 people buried there. That place is over 80 acres. And how many poets are buried there? This made the librarian think. She spoke after a moment of consideration. I will say, you can veer from the military sections as I do know he didn't serve. It will most likely be an old tombstone. I'm not sure how legible the name and date will be, or if there will even be a name on it. Are you sure you want to do this, honey? I feel like I have to now, after reading him, Lila said. But then she snickered, and the snicker seemed to be hastily trying to fasten a mask over her face. She dipped her head and looked back down at the closed volume. Where are you, Corbin? Lila asked herself that afternoon while she was walking through Pine Grove, was a pen and a red notebook in her hand, which she was planning to write a composition in. But she didn't want to start writing it until she found the poet's grave. Maybe creativity was equaled by death, and she wouldn't be able to find him. The only good thing was that it was a beautiful spring day, and the smell of the freshly cut cemetery lawns dispelled the grass's earthy breaths. She applied sunblock on her shoulders, so that smell was there too, but the cold smell of the sunblock had gotten shy in the presence of the smell of the grass. She walked and looked. She passed down the rows of tombstones, walked the hills and ignored the moppy-headed trees that tried tempting her with their shade. The sheer amount of tombstones quieted her, and the more she walked, the more she began to feel that this one cemetery seemed bigger than Massachusetts itself. It also distorted her sense of time after seeing the collection of dates all embedded in stone like 1,000 different Chinese fortunes, but they all ended up saying the same thing, which was this person was born and then they died, and this person was born and then they died. The numerical possibility of her own species almost put her in a trance, would have made forget what she was looking for. But, just like she had found the volume by chance, she found his grave. It was uphill, standing short with castle-like posture. Corbin Chatterton, 1801 to 1825, read the tombstone. The letters were only visible because they had been carved, and the wrinkles of the tombstone had not caught up with the Sinsel masonry yet. Atop the hill was a large oak with branches that sprawled out to form an umbrella over the daycare of tombstones. Corbin's tombstone was 80% shadows, broken by 20% light that managed to cut through the leaves. It was comforting to know that this tombstone had a ballet of sunlight and shadows to play on it all this time. Lila took a breath and sat down beside Corbin's tombstone, opened up her notebook and began to write, humming different notes and progressions to herself, quietly so as to not disturb the dead. She wrote many movements and variations of the same movement, humming to herself and making corrections along the way, sometimes even starting all over again. What she was doing was composing more than a poem. Poetry is for the conscious, music is for the subconscious, thus explaining the almost torpid state she entered into while inspiration whisked her away. Her pen the whip that kept the steeds in flight, that's what Corbin would have said. She practiced on the keyboard in her room that night, making corrections and changes to her sonata along the way. Halfway through the composition, she decided on titling it as Corbin's Sonata. Its melodic and somber tones were hindered by the prissy range of the keyboard, but she knew it would sound all the better on the organ in St. Mary's. Still, even when she played it on the keyboard at 3 in the morning, she couldn't help but remember how she had imagined the silhouette of a man striped in sunset orange that almost revealed his identity, releasing a morning dove up into the sky. Corbin might have described the sonata as having come from a sunset. It sounded like a triumphant but subtle happy ending to life cut short. Father Calabasas, do you mind if I try something out on the organ today? She asked the next day while standing in the belly of St. Mary's. Father Calabasas was in his black cassock with a white necktie, his eyes piercing, his skin pale, and his voice of some Central European and slightly vampiric original. Father Calabasas drew his pale Aurora Borealis eyes up to the indoor balcony of the church where the organ was. Its brass pipes and their many frowns was always quite the thing to see, and the machine always had monstrous promise to it. Why, sure, I don't see why not, Miss Concord. Is it practice you seek? Said the priest with Dunkin' coffee on his breath. She hesitated, almost dropping her red notebook. I wanted to try writing something. Oh, well, I was about to go out and trim some of the bushes in the parking lot, but if you want someone to give it a listen, I'm good, Father, she said warmly. I don't want to keep you. I will most likely be able to hear it out there anyway, he said, and patted her shoulder before bumbling out of the church, ready to grass stain his black pants. Lila turned behind the confessional booth and took a flight of stairs that was in a cramped chute where the church's anatomy was that of wood and not of brilliant marble and granite that are the colors of far-off temples. She proceeded to the organ like it was any other morning in Mass and sat down, opening up her notebook before her. There was more opportunity on an organ than on a piano or a keyboard, and the title she had written above the sonata seemed so promising aboard the steampunk-style instrument. Corbin's Sonata. That moment when her hands hovered down towards the keys was such a detrimental silence. It was like sitting in the theater and truly not being able to determine the ending of the movie. For one reason or another, her fingers hovered there for a moment. She might have imagined the man who was mostly silhouette, elating underneath an orange watercolor sky. Maybe sunsets were redder back then, when the tragedy of Salem was fresher in the sky. However, the sky was bright blue that day in Lynn. Her fingers pressed down on the corresponding keys, and immediately the pipes came to life. It was like a resurrection for the wrongly died. The swarm was a swarm that seemed to have started nowhere. It was in a hurry through Essex County. Tens of thousands of mourning doves, all in a violent commute, not just above the streets, but through them. A lady who had been walking her little dog ducked and laid on her stomach when the swarm passed. All their wings were so fast and small that it was amazing that wings as thin as playing cards could let such plump doves accelerate the way they did. Cars lurched to respective stops in that intersection that the witch house in Salem is. The swarm was such a brief reflection on their windshields. From here, the swarm ascended, but seemed indifferent to flying too high. No, these birds' business was not in the sky. The swarm slithered and wended through residential neighborhoods. Somewhere nobody saw them, and somewhere people did. They curved up and over buildings when they had to, but always came curving back down, slinking in roller coaster finesse to wherever they were going. The librarian in the South Branch Peabody Library was too involved in the book she was reading to see the blurred traffic past the window. But its sound alerted her, and she looked up from her book when it was too late, with a couple of patrons doing the same. Horns honked. A child reached out of the stroller and giggled with the two budding teeth it had. Dogs yipped, not out of malice, but out of an absurd understanding with nature. The falcons that hid in trees stayed themselves from chasing the swarm. Seagulls in the many pothole-infested parking lots remained grounded. Father Calabasas was intrigued with the sound that was coming from his church while he stooped over to weed a strip of mulch from which some hedges grew. It enhanced his gardening duties. The music sounded as misunderstood as Toccata and Fugue, triumphant as 99 Red Balloons, and as tickling as Vivaldi, and Lila's fingers tickled on the keys as if she had been playing it all this time. Perhaps the song was always in her. That's why she played it so well. She just had to write it down for it to exist. Exist. It did exist. Her pleading shout at the turtle pond had been worthwhile. The more the sound came out of the church with the attitude of a newly wedded couple, and the more Father Calabasas progressed down the row of hedges, the more he wished that the piece was something that he could play in his car. He wished he had it to listen to on his way to Dunk's, on his way to church, on his way to the houses of the elderly when supplying communion. Something cut the air. A shadow entered down the street that St. Mary's was on, and Father Calabasas turned to see the swarm of mourning doves shooting towards the church. Being not afraid, he stood still and watched the swarm fill the space between houses, the sound of all their wings unfolding and folding the air. The swarm was as long as an unwinded fingerprint, and it took a while for the entire swarm to amalgamate around St. Mary's. It created an ever-turning vortex around it, flying, flying, flying in a circle. When the swarm was finished arriving, Father Calabasas stepped back and craned his neck, watching the tornado of mourning doves churn. They all flew so fast, but so elegantly without crashing into one another, that it seemed they had the grace of fighter jets. Oh, but this was a peaceful thing. The priest watched with his jaw dropped until Corbin's sonata ended in the sorrowful chuckle of some apologetic but happy notes, and the swarm started uncoiling itself from the church. This took some time as well, given the length of the swarm, but eventually the church was rid of it, and the swarm ascended until it became faint as smoke, growing smaller and smaller, until Father Calabasas saw nothing but a blue April sky. But how strange it was to see one mourning dove falling out of the air, its wings working rapidly to cool its re-entry. It landed on a telephone wire and looked down at the priest. It looked at him and cooed like a curious cat. "Oh, your wings must be tired, little friend," the priest said, despite the distance between him and the telephone wire. And like that, it ended. Lila's fingers retreating from the keys. The only sound in the church was the faint jingle of the beads on her wrist. Had she seen the swarm outside the stained glass windows? I am not sure. We have to leave her now, but I think she sensed us. Part of her must have heard our wings berate the air and send feathery winds against the church. I saw a swarm of mourning doves crusade in unison into the candle clouds. Their little wings have such a sky to break. Their little wings against their bellies pound. A stanza by Corbin Chatterton, 1823.